So in today's session, we are going to discuss one more new topic. We call it as an collections. Okay. So the collection is nothing but we call the collection as an interface. Okay. So even the collection as an interface, and inside the collection, we are having mainly three interface. One we call it as an list, set, and map. Okay, as I told, so these are like interface. So what is the need of the collection concept? So why we are going for the collection concept in the Java? So generally, right, this collection is used to store multiple values. So with the help of the collection, we're able to store a multiple values. We have already discussed we are having something called as an array. Okay, so with the help of an array, we are storing the multiple values. Then why again we are going for the collection to store a multiple values? So the reason is for example, I'm just creating an array. So I'm creating an integer array like int a is equal to, in which I'm just storing three values. Okay, so during the runtime, if I'm planning to add a new value, so we can't add a new value in an array, because whenever you initialize the array, so the size is fixed. Okay, so whenever the size is fixed, so you can't add a new value inside it. So in order to avoid this, we are going for the collection. So when we started using the collection concept, with the help of a collection we can store a multiple values. But what happened in the sense, whenever we are keep on adding the new values in the runtime, so the size will grown automatically. So for example, till now, we have automated many things. Okay, I am planning to extract the drop down values. So initially, in order to extract the drop-down values, you may use the loops, and with the help of the loops, you are just iterating the values. We are getting those values. So in the next update, the developers are adding many drop-down values. So whenever they add a new drop-down values, so if we need to do a validation, so we need to store somewhere. So where we are going to store in the sense, we are going to seek help from the collections. So why we are seeking the help from the collection in the sense, because inside the collection we can store multiple values, and even if new values are introduced, we can store the new value as well, because the size is not fixed. So whenever we keep on adding the new value, so the size will grow automatically. But whereas in case of an array, right, the size is fixed. So once you initialize something, so it is going to be fixed till the end of the program. You can't do any modification. So that is the reason we are going for the collection. So the collection is nothing but, so we calling them as an container. Okay, so it's just a container to store a data. Okay, it's nothing but just a container. And inside this collection, we are having three interface called as a list, set, map. And we have already discussed about the interface. So for an interface, we can't create an object. Okay, then how we are going to use this interface in our coding? So obviously, we need to implement the interface with the help of the class. So in order to implement the list interface, okay, we are going to use the class called as an array list. In similar way, in order to implement the set, we are going to use the hash set class. And likewise, for the map, we are going to use the hash map. Okay, so generally we are implementing the interface with the help of the class. Then how you will be writing your code? So for example, if I'm planning to use the collection interface, so which is nothing but inside the collection I'm planning to use the list interface, then how I will be using the list? So I'll be using the keyword called as a list, and I will be providing the variable name, and then I'm just creating the object for the respective class. So I'm just creating the object for the array list. Okay, so now here the array list going to act as a resizable array. So what is the difference between array and the array list is like? So it is like kind of an resizable array. So resizable in the sense we can modify the size, we can keep on adding the new value or we can remove the existing value. So that's the reason like we call them as an resizable array. Okay, so we are implementing the list interface like with the help of the class called as an array list, and inside this array list we are going to store multiple values. And what kind of values we may store, like we will be storing an numerical values or the string values, etc. So we need to specify the type. So we should specify the type. So that we can make the list to store the value accordingly. And where we need to specify the type. So after using this list, so we should add the lesser than greater than symbol. Here we need to specify the type. So for example, if I'm planning to store a integer value, so I should specify the type as an integer. So now it will become an integer list. Inside this list, we can store only the numerical value. In similar way, here I need to add the type called as an integer. So if you are planning to store a string, okay, so then we need to create one more list and we need to specify the type. I'm adding the data type called as a string, and I'm giving the variable name called as an b, and I'm implementing the list interface with the help of the class called as an array list. Here I need to specify the type. Let me just specify the type to the string. Okay, so then at the end I'm just adding the open and close bracket, and I'm closing the respective statement. So now we have created the list and we need to add the value inside the list. So how you are going to add the value inside the list in the sense like with the help of an add method. Okay, so whenever like we use the add method, so it will help us to add the value into the list. Okay, so with the help of an add method we can keep adding the value inside the list. So whenever we use the add method, so we can keep on adding the new values. Okay, so now let me just explain you in a program. So let me just open our old framework, okay, inside which I'm just navigating to this Java basic. Now let me create a separate class for this list implementation. So now let me just add the Java class called as an list example, and then let me just click on the enter button. So if we need to run this particular class, then what we used to do, so like we will be using the main method. I'm just creating the main method with the help of the keyword called as an PSVM. As a first step, I'm creating one list. So I'm just using the list. I'm specifying the type. Let me just store a integer value, and let me just give the variable name as an L is equal to, we are going to implement the list with the help of the array list class. Okay, I'm just using the array list class, and here we need to specify the type. So I'm just going to store the integer value. Now whenever there is an error, hover over the mouse and click on the import statement. Okay, if you hover over the mouse, it will be importing the statement. So generally this list, array list, etc., so everything we are gaining the knowledge from the Java, and it will be importing from the package called as an util package. Okay, so it will importing from the util package of the Java. So now we have created the list. Now inside this list we need to add a value. So how we are going to add a value? So with the help of an add method. So what is the variable name? So the variable name is L, and if I say L dot add, okay, so we could be able to see the add method. So now inside which if I say add of 45, so it will store the 45 inside this list. And if I need to add new value, then I can use the add method. So whenever like we use this add method, it will keep on adding the new value. So now I'm just adding the value called as an 89. Now if I try to like add a print statement, and if I try to print this list, okay, I'm trying to print the list, and I'm trying to right click and run this particular program. So now what happened? Okay, inside this list L, it will store two values called as an 45 and 89. Okay, and if you are planning to add one more value, then you can again use the add method, and with the help of an add method, like we can keep on adding the new values. So whenever like we are using this add method, it will add the new value into the list. Okay, which means like the size will grown automatically. So now you could see it has added the two values called as an 45 and 89. Now I'm using the add method once again. If I say, okay, L dot add, okay, and if I'm just planning to add 100, and let me just add a one more sysout statement to verify whether this new value is added to the list. So I'm just printing the L. I'm just right clicking and I'm running the program once again. So now if you see the output, so it will be having the output like 45, 89 and 100. So it will store the new value as well. So whenever like we are adding the new value, so the size will grown automatically. And one more observation you need to note here is like whenever we are adding the new value, so the new value are adding at the last index. Okay, so initially I added the first value as 45 and second value as an 89, and now I have added the new value called as an 100. It is adding at the last index. Now if I'm planning to add one more value, so let's say, so I'm just using the add method L dot add, and I'm using to add a value called as a 12. Okay, now I'm just trying to print the list. Okay, so now the new value will be like added at the end. Okay, so generally the new value will always amount at the end. So technically what happening here is like, okay, it is maintaining the ordered fashion. Okay, so what is mean by ordered fashion? So the ordered fashion is nothing but, so the index in the index which we are adding. So for example, like we have added this value called as an 45 in the zeroth index. So it will store in the zeroth index. So then this 89, the new value will be in the first index. Then next new value will be in the second index. Then it will be in the third index. Okay. So it will maintain the index order. So which we call it as an ordered fashion. So ordered fashion is nothing but it will use the index as it is maintaining the ordered fashion. So whenever required, with the help of the index, we can retrieve the specific value. Okay. And one more thing is like whenever we are planning to use the list, right? So the list will, okay, allow us to store the duplicate value. Okay, we can store a like duplication, we can store a duplicate value. For example, if I am planning to store 100 once again, so how I can store? So I can use the list L dot add. Okay, I'm using the add method, and with the help of the add method I'm just adding the value called as 100, but we have already stored the value called as 100, and I'm trying to store one more value called as 100. Even if you try to store a duplicate value, so the list will allow us to store a duplicate value. So now if I right click and run the program, so the 100 will be stored twice, and the new 100 will be adding at the last index because it is maintaining the ordered fashion. So now if you notice, so it is allowing us to store a duplicate value. So whenever like we are using the list, so the list will allow us to store the duplicate value. Okay, whereas like there is something called as a set. Okay, so even like with the help of the set, like we are going to add a multiple value. And what is the major difference between the list and the set is like, so we can store the duplicate value in the list, but whereas in the set, so it won't, okay, allow the duplicate value. So we can't store the duplicate value. So that is the major difference between the list and the set. And other thing is like whenever we are planning to use the set, so the set will always store the value in the unordered fashion. Okay, so it always store the value in the random order pair. Okay, but here it will store the value in the linear way. So in which order we are adding the value, it will maintain the same order. But whereas like in a set, it will always store in an unordered fashion. So let's see an example like how we will be using the set as well. Okay, so now let me create a one more list. So let's say, so this time, so I'm creating the one more list and I'm specifying the like type as an string, and then I'm just giving the variable name. Let the variable name be the h. And how we are implementing this list, with the help of the class called as an, okay, array list. Okay, we have implemented with the help of the concept called as an array list. So now how we can add the new value inside this list h, with the help of an add method like h dot, okay, I can say add, and I can add a new value. So this time we need to store only the string. If I give the numerical value, it will throw the error, because whatever the type we have specified, so we should add the respective value. So if it is of a string, okay, we should store only the string. So let me just store the value called as an LMTI. And if I'm planning to store one more value, then I can say h dot add method, and I can say learn more. And if I try to print the h, it will store two values like called as an LMTI and the learn more. And how it will print the value? So in the order which we have stored. So it will always maintain the linear order pair, which is nothing but we call it as an ordered fashion. As it is having the ordered fashion, we can retry the value based upon the index. So whenever you are using the list, we can retry the value based upon the index. For example, if I need to retry the value called as a learn more, so obviously like it is present in the first index. You know the index will be starting from the 0. So this is the 0th index and this is the first index. Now if I need to retry the value, so then there is a method called as an get method. So just I'm adding the print statement, and what is the variable name of the string list? It is h. If I say h dot, there is a method called as an get, and inside the get method we can pass the index. So if I say pass the index as 1, the output will be learn more. Okay, so we can retry the value based upon the index, but whereas in a set we can't retry the value based upon the index, because it is maintaining the random order pair. Okay, so now you could see it is printing the output called as a learn more. And again, if I give the wrong index, if I say the index is 2, then obviously the expectation is like we have already seen this exception. So whenever we are injecting the incorrect index, then it will be throwing the exception called as an like out of bound exception. Okay, it will says the index out of bound exception, because the maximum index is like up to 0 comma 1, but we are trying to like access beyond the index value. Okay, so whenever the out of bound exception occurs, so you should have the look on the index value. Now in similar way, let me create the class for the set, and let's see how we are able to store the value in the set. So in the basics of Java, I'm just adding the new package. So let it be like kind of an, okay, set example. Okay, so now we have created the set. Now in order to execute this, I'm adding the main method. Let me add the main method with the help of the keyword called as an psvm. Okay, so now this is done. Now we need to use the set. In order to use the set, I'm using the interface called as a set. If you notice, like whenever like we are typing the set, it is giving the suggestion and it is notating with the notation called as an I. So I is nothing but is an interface. Even you can choose from the suggestion. It will automatically add the import statement. Okay, now we need to specify the type. So let's say I'm planning to type an numerical value, then I should specify the type as an integer. I'm giving the variable name as an yes, asset is of an like interface, we can't create an object, and how we are going to implement the interface with the help of the class called as an hash set. Okay, now I could say is equal to new of, okay, hash set. Okay, and then we need to specify the type. So let me just specify the type as an integer. Okay, at the end we should add open and close bracket, and we need to close the statement by adding the semicolon. So now if you click on the input statement, the errors will be rectified. Again, in the set, in order to add a new values, so we should always use the add method. So either it is of a list or the set, so we always use the add method. So now I can say like yes dot, okay, add, and with the help of the add method I can add a new value. So let's say I'm just adding the value called as an 55, okay, and I'm adding one more value, okay, let it be of an 77, and I'm planning to add one more duplicate value. So let me add this 55 once again. Okay, if this is the case, okay, now what happened? It should not allow us to store the duplicate value. Now let me just add the print statement, and let me try to print the set called as an yes. And if I try to right click and run the program, okay, so what happened? Like it will store 55 only once. So the reason is like it won't allow us to store a duplicate value. So now you could see it has stored the value 55 only once. And if I run the program once again, so there is a chances, okay, so either 77 can be stored first, and after which the 55 can be stored next. So because it always maintain the random order pair, so we can't always say so it will store the value in the same way how we added, because it always follow the unordered fashion. So which is nothing but it's a random order pair, we can't use the index. So with the help of the index we can't retrieve the value from the set. Okay, so now what is the major difference between the list and the set is like, so whenever like we are using the list or set, it is helping us to add a multiple values of a similar data type. Yes, that is fine. So the major difference is like with the help of the list, we can store the duplicate value, but whereas with the help of the set, we can't store a duplicate value. So whenever we are using the list, it will store the value in an ordered fashion. So as it is maintaining the ordered fashion, with the help of the index, we can retrieve the value. So whenever like we are using the set, so it always follow the unordered fashion. Okay, as it is maintaining the random order pair, we can't use the index. So the index concept won't work in a set. So now there will be few cases like you need to like retrieve like all values which is present inside the list or set. So how you will be retrieving like all the values stored inside the list or set? So whenever like we are planning to do the repetitive action, then obviously like we will be using the concept called as an loops. Okay, with the help of the loops, so like we can retrieve all the values which is present inside the respective list. So either we can use the traditional loop, or we are having one more concept called as an advanced for loop, or sometimes we call it as an, okay, so for each loop. Okay, so we can use the for each loop or the advanced for loop. So whenever like we use this concept called as an advanced for loop or for each loop, okay, so the syntax will be becoming much simpler way. Okay, so we can use this advanced for loop even in array. For example, I'm just creating an array. Okay, so this is the a of array in which I'm storing a multiple values. Let it be like kind of 10 comma 20 comma 30. Okay, I need to retrieve the value. So the traditional loop syntax, you know, we will be using the for keyword. We will be initializing something, we will be setting up the condition, and if the condition is true, it will step into the particular block, and during the next run, so the incrementer operator will execute. Okay, so but in case of an advanced for loop, so here we are not going to use the condition. So I'm using the same keyword called as an for, okay, and we should use this colon and we need to specify the input. Okay, so what is the input we need to read? So if you are planning to read this a, so then I can say like for, okay, colon of, okay, a, and after specifying the input, so we should specify the output. So what will be the output? So because like whenever we are using the loop, it is going to retry one by one. So now what will be the output? So the output will obviously like kind of an numerical value, which is nothing but it's an integer. Then we should specify the data type of the output and you can give some variable name. Okay. So now if I, okay, print this variable, okay, if I print this variable called as an x, okay, it will print the output. Okay, so if I print the variable called as an x, it will print the output in a first run, like it will print the 10, in the next run it will print the 20, and in the another run it will print the 30. Okay, so how it is printing the output? So here it will work on the principle called as an hash next. Okay, so what is mean by hash next? So as we are injecting the input, okay, so it will pick the first input and it will check, so is there is any other new value next to it. So as the value is present next to it, now the hash next will become true. Okay, so which is nothing but it is having the next value. Okay, so the hash next will become true, so it will step into the loop. Now during the next run, so like after 20, so after picking the 20, so it will just check, do we have any other value? Yes, it's having any other value. So then the hash nest is true, it will step into the loop. Now after like picking the 30, okay, so after just printing the value 30, it will check like do we have any other value next to it. So obviously like we are not having any values, then obviously the hash nest will become false. So whenever the hash nest is false, the loop will terminate. Okay, for example, for better understanding, like we have already created the array program, right, array example, right? So let me just try to use the for each loop over here. Here let me use the keyword called as an for, and what is the input we need to inject? So we are going to inject the input called as an a, and if we inject the input, so what will be the output? So the output will be obviously like kind of an integer, so I can just specify the data type and I'm just giving the variable name, and then I need to create the block for the for each loop, and then I should add a sysout statement in which I am just going to print the value called as an k. So now what happened? Okay, so during the first run it will pick the 100. Okay, and the 100 will be stored in the variable called as an k, and it will print the value called as an 100. And while executing the loop for the second time, it will check, do we have any other value next to the 100? Yes, it is having the value, which means the hash nest will become true. So it will pick the 200 as an input and it will store the 200 in an output variable called as an k, and we are able to print the like variable called as an 200. Okay, the value called as an 200. Now again it will pick the next input. Okay, so like while like picking the next input, right, it will check whether like do we have the um, next value or not. Obviously like after 200 it is having the next value, so it will pick the 300, it will print the 300. But when it try to execute for the next time, so now after 300 it doesn't have any new value, which means the hash nest became false. So whenever the hash nest became false, okay, it will terminate the loop. Okay, so generally, right, so with the help of the for each loop, we can iterate the value without setting the condition. And how the logic over here is like with the help of the hash nest principle. Okay, so every time like it will check whether the new value is present next to it. If the new value is present next to it, it will run the loop. If there is no other new value, then hash nest will become false and it will terminate the loop. Okay, so we can use the same logic in the list as well. Okay, so either you can use the traditional loop or we can use the for each loop. But if you use the for each loop, the syntax will be like becoming much simpler way. For example, here let me just use the for each loop. I'm using the for keyword. Okay, and what is the input we are injecting? We are injecting the list as an input. So what is the variable name? It is h. So if we inject this input, what will be the output? So the output will be obviously like string, because it is going to read one by one. So obviously like the output is going to be the string. So I need to specify the output type, okay, with the help of the data type, and let me give some variable name. Let it be like g, and I'm creating the block called as an for the for each loop. I'm just creating one block, and inside the block I'm just adding the print statement. I'm printing the value called as ng. So now what happened? Initially it will pick the LMTI. Okay, so it will store the LMTI and it will print the LMTI. Now during the next run, it will check, do we have any hash next value? Obviously it have the next value. Then it will pick the next value. So here the learn more will be passed. The input will be learn more. The learn more will be stored in this output and it will print the output. Now it will try to execute the loop for one more time. But after learn more, it doesn't have any value. Okay, so then what happened? The hash nest principle became false. So the true or false, we technically call it as a boolean. So one and only if the boolean value is true, it will step into the particular loop. If the boolean value is false, okay, it will terminate the loop. Okay, so now whenever the hash nest principle fails, the boolean value will be false. So whenever the boolean is false, okay, it won't execute the loop. So now if I try to, okay, run this program, it will easily like retrieve the value from the list. So even in this case, I can use the traditional loop as well. But when is of a traditional loop, like we need to set the condition. But whenever like you are planning to avoid the condition, you can use the for each loop. So now you could see the output called as an LMTI and learn more. Okay, so the first learn more is due to the intents which we have printed. In similar way, even in the set, we can use the for each loop. So we can use like for keyword, and we need to inject the input, and then we need to specify the output type. The output type will be like kind of an integer, and I'm just giving some variable name, and I'm just creating the block for the for each loop, and then like I'm just adding the sysout statement, and then I'm printing the value called as an d. Now during the first run, it will pick the 55. Okay, the 55 will be injected and it will be stored in the output and it will print the output. And during the second run, what happened? It will check after 55, do we have any other value? Obviously, like it is having other value. Okay, so it will pick the next value. The next value will be passed and it will print the respective value. But this time, right? So it is having one more value, but it is a duplicate value. It won't consider the duplicate value. Okay, if it ignore the duplicate value, do we have any other new value next to 77? Obviously not, right? So whenever we don't have the next value, then hash nest principle like will become like false. Okay, then it will terminate the loop. Now if I right click and run the set, okay, now it will print the output. So either the output will be like 5577 or 7755, because the set will always maintain the random order pair. Okay, so now you could see it has retrieved the value successfully. And even if you are planning to use a traditional loop, yes, you can use it up. There is nothing wrong. Like for, okay, what is the traditional loop syntax? It will be initialization. So int I is equal to 0, and then like we need to set the condition like I less than, okay, we need to set the number of values which is stored inside the list or set. If you need to know the length, so then I can say like s dot, Okay, so it will give the method called as a size. Whenever we say the size, it will give the length of the list, or it will give the length of the set. Then I can say like I plus plus. Okay, so then, okay, here in this case, right, how will you printing the value? So we can say like you will be using the method called as an get method, but obviously like we can't use the get method because the index concept won't work in the set. So you don't have an option, like when you are planning to retrieve the value from the set, you will be using only the for each loop. But whereas in the list, right, we can use a traditional syntax as well, because the reason is like we can use the get method, and with the help of the get method we can pass the index value. Then I can use the for keyword, and I'm initializing something. So int I is equal to 0. Then I'm specifying I less than what is the list we are going to read. Let's say I'm planning to read the list called as an h. So then I need to set the condition. I can say h dot size. I can set the size, and then I can set the increment operator called as an I plus plus. Okay, and then right, I'm just creating the block for it. Now we can add a sysout statement, and we can easily use the get method. I can say h dot get method, and with the help of the get method we can pass the index value. So index value we are setting in the variable called as an I, right? So during the first run it will be like 0th index, and during the second run it will be like first index. It always check for the condition. Whenever the condition is satisfied, it will step into the particular block. Okay, so now if I just run the program, so I will be getting an output. Okay, so it depends upon our need. So either we will be using the like for loop or for each loop. So whenever we are using the for each loop, so the syntax will be like pretty simple. So we don't need to set a condition. So basically it work on the principle called as an hash next. Okay, so if we have value next to it, then it will pick the value and it will execute it. If it doesn't have any value next to it, then the hash nest principle will become false and it will terminate the loop. Okay, so this is how like we will be using the list and the set. So now we need to know the practical implementation. So in which place actually we are going to use this list and set? Because just we learn like how to store the value in the list and how to store the value in the set. Okay, so we know like with the help of an add method we are keep adding the new values, and whenever we are adding the new values, like the size will be grown automatically. But we need to know the usage. Okay, so that is what like we are going to discuss in the next phase.